Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Live Your Spa Life show. Spa life is a lifestyle that accepts that accomplishment and harmony coexist. The Spa and Spa Life, the SPA, is for Seek Power Always, that power within you to do your deeper work in the world. I am so thrilled to introduce our next guest, which is Mitzi Perdue. She is a science writer and a health writer, as well as a television hostess and producer. Her television series, Country Magazine, was syndicated in 76 stations. Her most recent book, How to Be Up in Down Times, was co-written with Mark Victor Hansen, the Chicken Soup for the Soul guy. She tells me she is eager to share some of the tips for getting through the stress of the pandemic causes. She'd also like to share some things that we can all do to help combat human trafficking, which is near and dear to my heart. Mitzi, welcome to the show.
What an absolute joy to be with you. And I love your background.
Thank you so much. I love it too. It's nice to have it in there. So thank you so much for being here with us. And I would definitely like to jump into the recent book that you and Mark have written together about combating stress. I mean, people feel like, this last year was like 20 years, and there were a lot of things that took people off track. So what can they do to help combat that stress?
Well, I'll give you one recommendation that a lot, or maybe practically all, of health professionals agree with. And that is, it's actually medically necessary if you're under a whole lot of stress to give yourself respite. And that's going to vary for each person. But for some people, it might be watching a James Bond movie. For other people, it might be playing with grandchildren if they're around. Whatever it is, where you can, for at least an hour, forget the terrible things that are eating you alive, like maybe how are you going to pay the rent, or somebody you really love is very ill. If you're constantly bathed in stress hormones, your body doesn't have a chance to kind of recover. And so it actually is medically necessary to do something that might feel indulgent, but do it. And can I ask you a question, which is,
Yes.
and I'll tell you mine, but what is it for you that if you're engaged in it, that for the moment you can forget all the other lousy, terrible things that are happening in the world in your life? What's a good respite?
Well, I love this. I love this so much because I look at, self-care and rejuvenation, that these are necessities. These are not just luxuries. These are necessities in order for us to be the best version of ourselves. And there's two things that I like to do. One, when I come home from the gym in the morning, we have a infrared sauna in our home. And so I go in there, and not only does that help rejuvenate my body, but that's where I do my meditation. So I allow myself that quiet time. It's just me in there. I'm able to be in that meditative space that's really helpful. And I also always have a jigsaw puzzle on my kitchen table. And I love it for many reasons. I love when there's a lot of different colors. I feel like my brain gets to sort things out. I get to, solve things by putting things together. And I also get a lot of creative juices that happen during that time. So it allows me just to reset, feel joyful. And, there were a couple times I thought, well, is there something more important I should be doing than creating a puzzle? But I am totally agreeing with you and Mark in that if we don't do the things that fill us up and give us joy, we can't be our best version of ourselves. And so those are a couple things that are just the go-tos for me.
Well, I have a niece who runs a nursing home, and it's a quite large one. She has many hundreds of residents. And she says that if people who don't take respite, if they're caring for somebody who's seriously ill, say an Alzheimer's patient, a Parkinson's patient, if they don't allow at least an hour a day of something that can be a complete escape, and maybe it's talking on the phone with a girlfriend, whatever it is, she says they have a higher chance of dying before the person that they're caring for does. That
Wow.
it's actually, when I say medical necessity, I mean it. It's life and death. You need a certain amount of time to escape the things that are causing you stress. So it's not, as you say, it's not luxury, it's not indulgence, it's a necessity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I love it. And so what do you do?
What do I do? Well, I'm really worried that this is not going to be relatable to most people, but it does it for me. I love computer programming. I just like nothing better than, say, database programming, because to me it's like a three-dimensional chess puzzle. And again, I'm not recommending it for everybody, but I have sort of a math bent, and this involves, a whole lot of logic, and you can't be thinking of something else if you've got 10 other things that you're juggling in mind trying to get this thing to work.
Right.
Uh, but maybe I should share things that are more relatable, because
Well, I appreciate that you actually are sharing this because we all have different things that fill us up. And so many times, this is why when people do what they're passionate about, it's like it's hard for them to actually take time off or away because they love what they're doing. And that is part of what restores them. When I was talking to Dr. John DeMartini, I was telling him, like, what do you do for your downtime? He's like, what are you talking about? He said, I'm a researcher. I teach, I train. I love this. Like, I could do it all the time. And so we have to look at what are those things that are actually fueling us, that are actually allowing us to do that. And what it may be for you or I is completely different, for our listeners, which is why I love that we're encouraging them. Take a moment right now. Think about what is it that actually recharges you and do more of that.
yeah, but I'll tell you some answers I've heard. Playing with my puppy,
Mm,
or embroidery, or singing hymns, and then a big one is just being with your family. But yeah, what works for one person is going to be quite different from what works for another. However, your friend who says that he loves what he's doing, I'm in favor of keeping that up, because I'm assuming if he loves what he's doing, he's not bathed in stress hormones that are
right.
shortening his life. No, he's probably going to live longer if he loves what he's doing.
Yes, absolutely. And so, speaking of like being able to create your life and to do it by design versus default, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about growing your talent stack.
Uh, all right, I have a personal rule that I think I've followed since college. And by the way, I'm 79 right now and proud of it. So what I'm about to describe involves a lot of years. I make an absolute rule that a year cannot go by without my taking some kind of course. And amazingly, I mean, it's like a law of the universe. Whenever you learn something new, somehow the universe arranges it so that you need it, or at least that it's terribly valuable to you. And I'll tell you some of the kinds of things that I study. It can be photography, it can be uh, painting, it can be design, it can be nuclear particle physics, it can be Red Cross, it can even be courses in history. But somehow, the I don't know why it is. Have you experienced that when you've studied something, it turns out that it ends up being useful?
Absolutely. I think there's been nothing that I haven't studied that in some way, in fact, I almost feel like the immediate use isn't always apparent, but it's over time when things actually support you and so and like you like remember something from before and this becomes part of your repertoire, if you will, of all the different things that you've learned. And first of all, I have to say that you are a beautiful, vivacious 79-year-old woman, and I love when we talk to our wisdom elders, and me as having four grandchildren, I take wisdom from that and the things that we do in life. And so when we talk about you being a knowledge-based person, like people may not know, you actually have a bachelor's degree with honors from Harvard, as well as your master's from George Washington University. So no slouch in the learning department of where you've come from. And you also your family, and we talk about the people that we associate with, and how that affects our life. I mean, your family comes from the creating of the Sheraton hotels. Your husband Frank in the Purdue Chicken. Lots of success within your family, and I'd love for you to share because we have a lot of women entrepreneurs that are in here, and sometimes we can be in the shadow of the successes of our family or other things around us. How is it that you have utilized your family culture to help you expand in who you are? And how have you also, stepped out as a unique expression of yourself aside from your family?
Well, I'll share with you that, yes, my father was the co-founder and president of the Sheraton hotel chain. And by the way, we sold it at his death in 1967. So I'm not currently connected with the Sheraton hotels, but I sure as heck grew up in it. And I feel as if I got a lot of like role modeling from both parents of I don't know how to navigate through life. And among the things is I used to ask my father as a child, oh, how did you build this thing? How did he employed 20,000 people. He had 400 hotels and he had started with no employees and no hotels.
Wow.
And he said a piece of wisdom that's certainly been useful to me all my life. Maybe it will be helpful to others. He said that he felt that the success of the Sheraton hotel chain at every level was the people who worked for him, or actually, the way he would have put it was worked with him.
Mm.
And so naturally, that brings about the question, well, how did you get people who are willing to outperform all your competitors, stay with you for life, make a habit of going the extra mile? And he had several answers to it. The possibly the most useful is he said, people have a compulsion to live up to or down to your expectations. And so he felt that a leader's job, and I'm quoting, I just quoted him about people have a compulsion to live up to or down to your expectations. But he also said a leader's job is to give people a better vision of themselves.
Mhm.
So in any case where I'm interacting with other people who were working on a joint project, I make it just a personal habit to expect the best, to believe in them, to encourage them, and I'm almost rarely critical. And if you're okay with it, I'd like to share an example of how Father put that into effect.
Absolutely. Yes, this is valuable. This is like scaling at an ultimate degree.
Okay, because he did start with nothing. In fact, he almost started with less than nothing because he wasn't gifted at human relations at all. In fact, a quick side story: when he was 26 and had just gotten engaged to my mother, uh, my mother's future mother-in-law, my father's mother, told my mother, Molly, don't marry Ernest. He can never stick to anything. You're going to end up poor. I mean, and
Be forewarned.
exactly.
You may not know the whole story.
Well, thank heaven mother didn't follow that advice or I wouldn't be here.
Right.
But can you imagine what a wake-up call that must have been for my father to have his
Mm.
own mother tell this woman he's in love with and who spent, 50 years with afterwards, not to marry him because he could never stick with anything. So he did something that I take to be reasonably clever. He went to whatever was the equivalent of the Yellow Pages back in 1923, and he found the name Johnson O'Connor, Career Guidance Counseling. So he invested a whole day being tested for why couldn't he stick with anything and what should he do? Well, Johnson O'Connor ended the 8 hours by telling him, Mr. Henderson, you have the worst human relations skills I've ever come across.
Wow.
He said, since you are so terrible at this, but you're clearly a bright fellow, I recommend a career as a scientist. You'd do well in a laboratory, maybe inventing things or just doing scientific things where you don't interact with people. Well, my father left there and he told me about this. He said he thought it through and he realized that any kind of real large scale success that you have in life really depends on your ability to interact with other people. And if
Mhm.
he was so terrible at it, he better learn. And so, as far as I can tell, he spent the rest of his life as a student of human nature, kind of what makes people tick.
Right.
And his approach to doing this was he read all the books that he could. He took courses. He took salesmanship courses because he reasoned that salesmen are good at persuading, and salesmen are good at understanding other people, and they're good at being energetic and not getting defeated easily. So he took
Right.
salesmanship courses. He took public speaking courses because he also felt that you're not going to be a good speaker unless you have, how about an acute awareness, understanding of what your audience wants and needs. And
Right.
then he'd read all the books and magazines that he could on human nature. And when he became more successful, he would actually have some of the greatest psychologists of the day as weekend house guests, just so that he could spend more time with them. And
Right.
the end result, okay, that's the backstory
Right.
to,
So wait, before you go into that, one of the things I want this to land for our listeners of what a great piece of wisdom, because how many times have you wanted to discover what it is that you want to do or show up how you want to show up in the world, and someone else tells you you're not that, you can't be that, and you have to make the decision of what skills you're going to increase, how is it that you want to be in the world, and do something about it, take that action around it. I mean, how much easier could have been for him to be this scientist behind closed doors listening to somebody else's advice? So we want to be clear on who's giving us the advice, to have it go through our internal system and decide, is this something I want to do something about? And because that was really a pivotal point in his life of making the next choice and decision. And I want our listeners to go, are you in that pivotal place in your life? Who are you listening to? Who's supporting you? Who's giving you that positive piece of information or the next level of direction, so that you could elevate yourself and not stay mired in the unknown?
yeah, because he could have just stayed a person with the worst human relations skills that the
Absolutely.
guy had ever come across. But he almost as an act of will, he recognized, I need to change, and this is how I'm going to go about it.
Good
All
for
right,
him.
that's fast forward now, maybe 10 years, and he and my uncle discovered that there was a hotel, and this is at the height of the Great Depression. We're talking 1933. There was a hotel that was just about to go bankrupt, and they could get it for like pennies on the dollar. Now, isn't it odd that somebody who is supposed to have the worst human relations skills in the world uh, would go into the hospitality industry? But by then, he had acquired so much understanding of human nature that I think he was light years ahead of any of his competitors.
Mm-hmm.
Because he told me uh, that all the hotels he ever bought, he did what he did with the first one, which was he asked all the employees of the hotel to come into the hotel ballroom. This is the first day that he's taken ownership. And he told me that he knew every one of those people who were in the ballroom waiting to hear the new owner speak. He said that he understood that every one of them could probably barely hear a word he was going to say, because they were so worried about losing their jobs. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that was totally top of mind. If you're worried
Right.
during the Great Depression of losing your job, probably not going to get another one. There was 25% unemployment. So Father knew that. And he was empathetic enough, from having studied human nature, to realize that what he said had to, how about dispel their fears so that they could hear his message? So the first words out of his mouth in every case when he took over a hotel was, I want every one of you to stay in your job. I want you to stay in your job because, first, I believe in you. But second, I know that you know your job better than anybody else in the whole world. And my job in this is to give you the resources and the encouragement to show the world just how good you are.
Mm.
And he said, he told them, you'll see, in the next few months, this hotel is going to turn around. It's going to be successful. It's going to be popular. It's going to be an example to the rest of the city that, terrible as economic times are right now, things can turn around. You'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can you imagine what it must have meant uh, to the employees to walk in there just
Right.
depressed, to suddenly find somebody who believes in you?
Right. Well, and a couple things out of that. One, to set the tone and the culture of positive expectancy, right? To shift in that. And I recently had a conversation with Dr. Nino Cobain, and he was talking about the difference. He is amazing. He's the president of High Point University, and he was talking about the difference between communication and connection. Like, even with the communication skills, which can be very high, and you can tell people whatever that you need to have and all that, but the connection, where you find out what is it that they're worried about, what are they anxious about, what is it that what's their goals, what's their dreams, who are they about. So your father did a great example of connecting with those employees to really let them share who they are and what they are about, which goes back to the employees are the first customers, right? To make sure who they are and the environment that's being created in that. So I really appreciated that difference between communication and connection. And that example with your father is a perfect one.
And there's a PS to that story, which is he told me that the words are important, but he said what he felt was more important happened the next day, which is when a hotel's been on the edge of bankruptcy, it's kind of gone to seed. You have stained carpet, frayed curtains.
Mm.
So the next day, the employees would see that he was investing money in the hotel, but it would never be in the areas where the public would see. Instead, it would be like the employee dining rooms,
Oh, wow.
showers, lockers, corridors. The first money he ever spent was on areas that would communicate to the employees how important they were to him.
That is so key. There's so many things that happen behind the scenes that people never see, right? And in hospitality, that is so important because it's like how you do one thing is how you do everything. And
Yes.
so when you set that stage and that intention, it makes a big difference. And I know that a lot of times when we're moving forward and things, there's fear, right? There's fear that comes up, and I would love for you to share about redefining failure and just some of your recipes for living and how you move through fear.
Well, my career, it's in some ways a little bit like father's. I had something to overcome. I had a severe lisp, and it was severe enough so that you could see it as well as hear it. And that, people who knew me well would sometimes confide in me that when they first met me, they had thought that I was stupid. And so every instinct I had towards shyness, were just growing because of that. Well, when I was 38 years old, I had something happen that changed my life. It involved the lisp, but it also involved self-confidence and fear of failure. I guess part of my shyness was if I didn't meet anybody, wasn't going to endure this thing of having people think that I was stupid. Well, I became a rice grower in Northern California. And, in case you're not sure you heard me, it's rice, the things that if you were Japanese, you might eat with chopsticks. So I was growing rice. And it was perfect for somebody shy because I didn't have to interact with hardly anybody. Uh, but I did interact with one person. He was a tenant farmer on my rice farm. And let's call him Peter, just to protect the guilty. Uh, Peter, I knew him for years, but at age 68, something happened that put my own life into perspective. This guy, he was extraordinarily intelligent. He had an IQ of over 200. And he had always expected to write a great book that would benefit mankind. And he spent his whole life collecting information, files, books, just anything that would go into this book called Life and Owner's Manual. And it would collect all the wisdom and information from many different cultures. And it was just, it was going to be his gift to humanity. But by 68, he hadn't written it. And at age 68, he got a terrible diagnosis. He had probably a couple of months to live before terminal heart disease took him.
Wow.
And anybody who has a death sentence, you would think that there couldn't be many things more depressing, except I think in Peter's case it was, because it meant his whole life's purpose, he wouldn't get to do it. Well, a miracle intervened. There's a place, I don't know if it still exists in Southern California, you might know, but the Pritikin Clinic back then, and we're talking 1978,
Mm-hmm.
it had a phenomenal record for helping people with heart disease. It helped them with diet, meditation, exercise, life attitude. He went there for a month, and the most wonderful thing happened. His heart revascularized. He eventually lived into his 90s from age
Wow.
68. Woohoo! Well, he
New
came back.
lease on life.
And how? Well, he came back and he comes into my office. And, before he couldn't walk across the room without crippling pain. And now he's bounding forward. He can walk 5 miles a day. Eventually lost 15 pounds. He's just in great shape. And I'm saying, Peter, this is the most wonderful news in the world. Now you can write your book. And he said, yeah, just a little bit more study and I'll start.
Wow.
I bet everybody can guess what happened next or what didn't happen next,
No book.
he didn't write his book.
Hmm.
But I realized at that moment when he said, just a little bit more study, I realized that he was never going to. And I also realized, because I really knew him well, if you spend hours and hours and hours walking fields with somebody, you
Right.
get a feeling of what makes them tick. And I, I knew what was keeping him back. He was afraid of failure. He was afraid that if he wrote the book and that it wasn't a success, that his whole life would have been meaningless. So Peter did the one thing guaranteed to produce failure, and that's not to try. And I decided pretty much in that moment that I was going to make my life the opposite of his.
Hmm.
Uh, I, I had always wanted a career in communication, like radio, television, newspapers, speaking, and I'd never dared try because I was so afraid of the mortification of turn downs and failing auditions and so forth. And then there was also my list that was an obstacle. But I decided I didn't want to be in Peter's situation of not giving my all to trying for the things that I wanted. I spent 9 months with a speech therapist trying to overcome the lisp, and the first 8 months, no progress of any sort. But by the end of the year, it took, and my lisp was gone. And at that point, I began trying just right and left, sending newspaper articles out, magazine articles out, auditioning for TV, auditioning for radio. And yeah, I got my share of turn downs. But within like a year and a half, I had a television show, a radio show, a syndicated newspaper column, and I was on my way to getting involved in public speaking. But it all came about because I redefined failure. For me, from then on, from the moment Peter said, I just need to study a little more, for me, my motto became ready, aim. Sorry, I got it backwards. Ready, fire, aim. That I would pull the trigger right off. I wouldn't care. It wouldn't be deeply discouraging to me to get a turn down because I'd say, I tried. And along the way of trying, maybe for an audition or writing articles that didn't make it, uh, just inevitably, just the act of trying means that I'm learning more, I'm meeting more people. Maybe I've attended conventions or read books or gone to lectures, one way or the other. Just the act of trying, I would define that as success. And if I actually got my immediate goal, so much the better. But the real effort, my point, was redefining failure. Failure is not trying and not giving it your all.
Right. I love that. Because that's usually, especially for entrepreneurs, that is, that fear of what it looks like on the other side. And, as so many people have articulated before, and you've done such beautifully now, is that just doing it, if you set that as the standard of success, of that you even just did one step, right? If somebody says, oh, I want to read so many books a year, but if you just say, I'm going to read one page, right? And that's your definition of success. Everything else above and beyond that is just more success. So giving yourself those points allows yourself to succeed on a much greater level.
I agree, and it's more satisfying along the way because, if you've redefined failure, and I guess that also means redefining success. For me, success is just plunging in and doing it. But when I described my motto as "Ready, Fire, Aim," that what I mean by that is act. Don't just think about it forever. However,
Right.
I'm not against doing all the planning you can think of. Like I have sometimes thought that my definition of intelligence, I mean, this is personal. I don't expect anybody else to go along with it, but my personal definition of intelligence is the ability to see how to get from here to there. The really smart people, the people who really get a lot of what they want done in the world are the people who can see, I want to be there. And to get there, well, in my case, I had to overcome a lisp. I had to overcome fear of rejection. I had to, write pitch letters and proposals. But but what I recommend to anybody is if you have a goal, figure out very strategically step by step. And I want the real small steps, like read the first page. Uh, Figure out the steps to get where you want to go. And I'm all for optimism. I mean, gosh, you have to have that. But I'm also for a huge dose of realism so that when the unexpected horrible thing happens that's a block along the way, you're not destroyed by it because you've sort of accepted that there's going to be setbacks. So figure out where you want to be, figure out how to get there, and build in some wiggle room for the fact that it's not going to be a straight line.
Right. Well, and speaking of not having a straight line, how is it that you jumped into being part of the cause of helping end human trafficking? And how can people help in that arena?
I love that question. Thank you a million times. I got into it because up until 2 o'clock of March 11th of 2019, the words human trafficking didn't really mean anything to me. It just wasn't on my radar. But I heard a lecture that changed my life. I saw, well, I saw images of a sting operation where a guy from the Child Liberation Foundation, and he told me he doesn't really want me to use his name, but the foundation we can talk about. This guy had a sting operation, which he rescued maybe a dozen girls from being trafficked. But the sting operation meant that there were cameras all around, and he could show the pictures of the girls before they were rescued. They were about to be delivered to, I think the fairest word to describe it is an orgy, a whole lot of older men who wanted 12-year-old girls. But what I couldn't unsee was, the terror, the fear, the depression on the faces of these children. And I learned that for a typical day for them, that they'd probably be raped 12 times a night, sometimes even 20, and that this would go on 365 days a year, whether they had their period or not, and that their life expectancy was less than 7 years, and that it was suicide, overdose, disease, or murder for organ harvesting. That would be their lives.
Right.
Well, having heard this story and having seen their faces and being unable to unsee what I'd seen, I decided that age 78, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. I
Mhm.
want to do everything I possibly can to combat human trafficking. And so in the years since, well, it's 2 years, close to 2 years, I've I've actually written articles. At this moment, I think it's 67 articles that I've written, interviewing heads of different anti-trafficking organizations, finding out what they need to do their jobs. And pretty much in every case, I learned they need money, and they need money because if they have more money, they can extend their reach. But on top of that, the really good thing is if they're spending less time fundraising, they can spend more time delivering services. So they want money, and they also want awareness. If people aren't aware of human trafficking, they're not going to donate, they're not going to volunteer, they're not going to report things that they won't even be aware of things that they would be once they start combating human trafficking.
Mhm. Right. Well, and we're going to put into the show notes as far as being able to connect with you. And I'd love for you to share with the WTF because that has a lot of mixed meetings for a lot of people.
Okay, I want people to remember WTF, but I was very deliberately chose it because it's easy to remember. The name Win This Fight came about in an odd way. Initially, the effort that I've been describing it was called the anti-trafficking auction. It was be people with very high value items would put them up for auction, and I could arrange for the uh, the auction fee to be almost nothing, so they could convert tangible items into cash to give to the anti-trafficking organization of their choice. So the name was going to be the anti-trafficking auction. Got a phone call from somebody I'd never heard of, but I think he had heard me on maybe a podcast. And he said, Mitzi, that name, anti-trafficking auction, it really sucks. And I'm saying, what do you mean? And he said, it's not memorable. It doesn't roll off the tongue. There's no call to action. But I've done some research, and the name Win This Fight is available. And I said, but the initials are WTF. I mean, isn't that kind of a turnoff for people? And he said, no, that's the best part of it, the very best part of the name, because things that go viral, things that people remember and that stick in your mind have some wrongness to them. And he said, for you, who sort of come across as slightly ladylike and classy, for you to be saying WTF,
Wait, what?
he said that makes it memorable. So this is the best possible name. Win this fight. It's a call to action. It's easy to remember. It kind of trips off the tongue. So that's where the name Win This Fight comes from. But now that everybody knows about Win This Fight and the initials, if you would like to be part of an organization that is working to combat human trafficking, text WTF to 51555 or 51555. If you'll do that, you'll come to my website, and I have all sorts of things that you can do to combat human trafficking. And if you'd like to get very much involved, oh, I'd love it. And I make a promise to you. I make a promise that I will never ask for more time or money than you want to donate. And people who do get involved, they tell me that it's just among the most satisfying things in life, because when you're combating one of the worst evils in life, that means that you are doing some of the most good in life. And so I'd love you to join me. Text WTF to 51555, and you'll come to my website. And if you write to me and tell me the kind of things you'd like to do, or just that you have time and skills, I will do everything that I can to match your level of interest with what we need. And I'll tell you some of the things needed right now. We have regional directors, but we're looking for state directors. And boy, if you have political contacts or a large Rolodex, let me know.
Absolutely. And we will put that all in the show notes. And you and I can talk about this all day long. And I know that people are going to want to stay in contact with you. We'll have that link there that they'll be able to do that. One of the things I want to ask, speaking of this, for those who can't see this beautiful background that you have with flowers and so much light and everything in there, I believe that our environment actually affects us, right? You were talking about, how do we restore ourselves and what those things look like. So I always like to ask my guests, you have a different experience in your bedroom versus your living room or your kitchen. What is your favorite room in your home and why?
I guess my office, which is what you're looking at right now, because I feel most effective and most sort of extending into life when I can communicate with people, and I do that in my office.
I love it. So good. And finally here, as we're wrapping up, how is it that you're being a force for good in the world?
Wow. Well, I'm trying to live out my own personal goal in life, which is to increase happiness and decrease misery. And I don't know of a greater source of misery than human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't personally know of a greater source of happiness than feeling that you're doing something about it.
Love it. Thank you, Mitzi, so much. It's such a pleasure having you and sharing your wisdom and just all of your life experiences and your giving heart. We thank you so much for being here with us.
It's been sheer joy being with you. Thank you.
My pleasure. And for our audience out there, it's you that gets those positive messages out in the world, you who can help win this fight and make a difference. Make sure you check in the links so you can connect to win this fight. And until we connect again, live your spa life. Bye for now. Bye-bye.